Well, I had already been teaching social justice in my classes and digital culture, but it wasn't until I got the SHREI Fellowship that I really started to think about what kinds of resources were available for teaching about human rights and how to more fully incorporate the discourse of human rights into my classes. And after incorporating it, I realized how much more it's grounded my curriculum, because I didn't realize that, once you get into the discourse of human rights, for students it makes it a lot more, they recognize the political power of human rights discourse.
As an English compositionist, like many in my field, I'm in the funny position of having been trained in literary studies, and then often when I teach transfer level composition classes, I'm asked to do many things except teach literature.
I've been interested in human rights education for my whole professional career, but I've just really never had the opportunity to develop it and extend it and really spend a concentrated amount of time thinking about how I could actually do that.
This situation often has us casting about for ideas for course themes and units and arcs that will allow our students to have collegiate level practice in reading and writing in some kind of content area that matters. And I think human rights provides that interdisciplinary content.
My first thought was, no way. But then I decided to give it a shot. And so I went to the symposium. The keynote was fantastic.
I'm teaching global studies, and we've been doing this since 2009. And human rights is just an integrated, essential part of describing or discussing global issues in any way. But what I've tried to do is frame our global issues class around human needs, human rights, and human responsibilities.
There was something that caught my attention, and I think I had some sort of a revelation at that moment. There was a lot of passion, a lot of enthusiasm and engagement of students with the idea. And then I thought, well, if I could bring 50% of this enthusiasm to my science course, especially in the lab, and get these students, the students, they pass the course, they do what they are supposed to do, but there is not a lot of engagement saying, hey, I'm finishing this project and I'm changing myself, I'm changing the world. I don't have a lot of that, and I said, if I can get half of that in my science course, that's it.
There's a lot of curriculum that we have to cover. There's curriculum guidelines we have to meet. There's specific texts they want you to use. And putting something like that in is not necessarily easy, but I really realized through my time with SHREI that it is a fabulous thing to put in your courses. And it's really, I think, the future of education and a really necessary part of courses. Writing up a project that was going to be able to reach my students, have them demonstrate skills and abilities clearly and effectively, things like that.
I think the main innovation was internationalizing my curriculum, because when I'd done social justice, we talk about gender discrimination in Silicon Valley, or the digital divide in the U.S. And so I really wanted to broaden my scope, and so that's what I had to do. I had to find more resources that were addressed human rights outside of the U.S.
The science courses in community college, they are crafted by faculties of community colleges, CSUs and UCs. And the course content is this. And honestly, we have time that much to deliver all of that. So I said, how am I going to introduce something new in a course if I don't have the time for?
Identifying myself as a co-learner to my students. Admitting that I wasn't trained for years and years in the human rights conversation, and that while I've certainly looked into it, perhaps more than many of them, the fact is that in their research and in their conversations, they're going to be turning over texts and ideas that may not have occurred to me. And so often my job in this situation is to be asking honest questions as opposed to merely leading ones.
I found that I need to just be aware that students need to be able to hear, see, as well as read things, because not everybody processes things so well when they read them. But if they can see an image, it makes what they're learning about much more real. If they can hear somebody speaking about a topic, that makes it via YouTube or any other means, that makes it work better.
The course that I decided to introduce is Earth Sciences for non-science majors, and it uses lots of visuals, lots of media and what's going on nowadays in the globe. And Earth Science has a little bit of astronomy, geology, and you know, I said, okay, so I think what I would do, when I show these nice pictures of diamonds and gold and copper, sulfur, you know, very well produced, and people working in mining with nice clothes and helmets, probably with a nice health insurance, nice clothing. I think I should show the other side of the story and give a little bit of questions and have the students come up with arguments and ideas with respect to that.
I teach classes that are delivered in 3 different formats. The first format is online, the second format is face-to-face classes, and the third format is a mix of online and face-to-face classes, and those are called hybrid classes. And all of my classes are one of those 3 types. And so what I ended up doing, because the common denominator in all of them is that I either have a full-on online website for the class, or I have a companion website that I've built for the face-to-face classes. So I have these sites for all my classes, and I incorporated an HTML page that includes interesting information. A lot of it I've gotten from research that I've done in the SHREI and being able to collaborate with other people in the SHREI. So I have on the HTML page links to really interesting information about human rights education.
The timeliness of the human rights conversation, I think, invites a certain orientation into technology. Particularly, I've been using student blogs in a different way than I have in other courses. In some courses, I've used them as repositories of work or sort of an evolving electronic portfolio of writing. In the human rights conversation, it really makes sense for students to invite public audiences into their blogs, to tag their content with the keywords that will allow them to be searched by interested audiences, and really move from a merely academic conversation into a more public one. I think one success of my teaching with human rights has been conducting a classroom inquiry in which my students are aware that the knowledge they're acquiring has stakes, and that the emotional engagement that they feel when they encounter images and texts that they find very arresting has an intellectual payoff at the end of the road.
I think one of the major successes is seeing how students have developed a deeper understanding of how new media and technology can change social structure. They used to think about technology in terms of how does it affect me, but now with this new sort of curriculum, they're starting to think about how does technology affect the world around me.
The students finish the course knowing if the entire humanity would have access to the things we have access, we would need to import 2 other planets Earth nearby and deal with the gravity, because probably we wouldn't survive with that. So what the students learn is to break one of the myths that we can do whatever you want.
Reading the students' responses to reflection assignments and things that get them to think about human rights, human needs, human responsibilities, and how history, politics, or economics plays into their lives and to the lives of other people in the world.
So now they're arriving at conclusions like how can social media encourage participation in democracy, and how can smartphones enable citizen journalism and change the way governments are run.
The second myth is, I think, and that is a success too, is science and mathematics is dry. I hate it. Science is nice, it's cool, it's engaging, and if you learn how to apply, you appreciate that, your life transforms. So I would think those 2 myths are being broken in my class, and I think that's a big success. Human rights, which, you know, at first sight has nothing to do with science, but is helping the learning curve of my students.
In particular, one of the things I pay a lot of attention to is the image advertisements that students create, and they've done some very, very creative, some very innovative things that demonstrate a clear understanding of their kind of average, everyday, daily life activities, and how they can now link those to human rights issues through person, place, object, or behavior.
In a sense, I guess I'm really hoping that I've been able to share my passion for this topic in a way that's made a required course something more than just an academic exercise.
I think the main obstacle or challenge that I faced is just the pacing, because on the quarter system it goes so quickly and we already have so much content to get through, and as a composition teacher I also have to teach writing skills.
I really felt compelled to try to bridge the gap between the theories of teaching that I encountered earlier in my career and the implications of teaching human rights. That is, I felt compelled to do some reading and some work on my own to try to develop a paradigm of what I was up to.
Human rights is not part of a science curriculum. And if the students are not interested, if some percentage, 20, 30%, they are not there, they can use that as I say, hey, I don't need to do that. I don't need to participate in that.
And meeting the needs of the students sometimes revolves around realizing what the students don't know. And I was going to say part of the success would be if they realize what they don't know by the end of the class. And then find some ways to figure out how to get information about what they don't know. But the challenges are they may not have the skills to figure out, to find information, and they don't know what they don't know.
And there's always a very wide range of preparedness levels, which means you're going to have some students who come into these projects, into this academic work, and they're going to have all kinds of skills and abilities that are taken for granted that they know how to do that. But then there's other students who are coming into this in a very, very underprepared way.
So I found source materials for my courses in a number of ways, and one of my favorite ways is through conversation with others. SHREI staff have recommended texts that I found very useful, but even in other situations I found myself talking about human rights and being informed of some really great material.
One of the things I do, I follow sort of what's trending on the internet, because I know that that's what's also going to be trending for my students. So I kind of have some understanding of what the things they're experiencing online.
News media, that's where I get my information.
I think I've become an avid reader of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and The Economist.
The place that I start with that is with a seminal reading in sociology, and the seminal reading is called The Promise. It's chapter 1 of C. Wright Mills's book, The Sociological Imagination, and it's a assigned required reading in the class that helps students conceptualize social life and their place in the world.
Paul Gordon Lauren's Vision Seen, I was lucky enough in my timing to get a hold of this great history of human rights and peruse its chapters on the UDHR right before I taught it, which really motivated me and I think made my comments about that document much more interesting for my students.
Mills's work talks about 3 pairings, the pairings between a person's self and their society, their history and their biography, and personal troubles as connected to public issues. And that's where we can really get into some good human rights education initiative material and really make a good solid connection there.
I don't want to be catastrophic, but during a semester, 4 months, I always have a nice earthquake. There is always some information there, and I can always squeeze in some human rights issues for them to discuss.
Another great resource has been working with the program on liberation technology and the D-School, because then I actually get to learn about specific projects that people are currently working on that relate to the topics that I'm addressing in my classes.
I like to find things, and I like to do some fact-checking sometimes, so I think that's the challenge, having students not rely on Wikipedia for everything, but also develop the skills where they can make some critical and analytical decisions about whether they should believe something, and ask the question, how do they know that?
One of the other ways in which I found myself gathering material for these classes is simply through the change in mindset that being part of this conversation has produced.